Module 2 focuses entirely on assessment. I'll show you how to figure out exactly where a student's reading skills break down and where instruction should begin. This module pairs with my Kickstart to Phonics teaching guide, a free guide you can get online at my Teachers Pay Teacher store. This guide serves as a companion for these modules. The link to the guide is in the comments below. Before we dive into the step back guide, it's important to understand how phonics instruction typically progresses across grade levels. This gives us a baseline for knowing where most students should be and helps us recognize when a student needs to start somewhere different. In kindergarten, phonics instruction usually begins with letter knowledge, identifying the upper and lowercase letters and producing their typical sounds. Once students have a solid foundation in letters, instruction moves into CVC words and digraphs. This is where students begin blending and segmenting simple words and learning common consonant teams or digraphs such as SH, CH, TH, and WH. First grade typically begins with a review of CVC patterns, then moves through the major phonics patterns, including digraphs, blends, and this is blends that are initial and final, CVCE with the silent E at the end of words changing the vowel sound, vowel teams, R-controlled vowels, and by the end of first grade, students should have a solid foundation in decoding and encoding single-syllable words across all major phonics patterns. Second grade usually begins with a brief review of earlier patterns, then spends more time on vowel teams, R-controlled vowels, and diphthongs, and moves into multisyllabic word reading. If you want to know more about pacing instruction for grades kindergarten, first, and second, I have several pages in my Kickstart to Phonics guide on pacing guides, including free pacing guides for kindergarten, first, and second. I have the pacing guides linked in the comments below. Now let's look at my step back guide. But here's the challenge. Not all students follow this neat progression. Some students enter your classroom with gaps. Some move between schools, some have missed foundational instruction, and sometimes you simply don't know where to start with students. That's where the step back guide becomes essential. If you're unsure where a student's breakdown is happening, this guide helps you identify the exact skill level where instruction must begin. The Step Back Guide is a diagnostic pathway that helps us identify the root cause of reading difficulties. Reading problems almost always begin at a more foundational level than what we first notice. This guide helps us step back from comprehension all the way down to phonemic awareness, so we can pinpoint exactly where instruction must begin. Let's start at the top. Comprehension. Comprehension is understanding what we read. This is often the first place teachers notice a problem, but it is rarely the true starting point of the difficulty. Many students appear to have comprehension issues, but what we're really seeing is the symptom, not the cause. To determine whether comprehension is the real issue, we use two types of assessments. The first one being reading comprehension assessment. This is where a student reads a passage, usually on their grade level, independently, and answers questions. You often get this data or this assessment is available through state benchmark assessments or district universal screeners or quarterly or mid-year reading assessments. Or if you're using a particular program, they often have comprehension checks based on that program. These assessments tell us whether the student can read and understand grade level text on their own. If a student consistently scores below benchmark on this type of test, It signals that something is interfering with comprehension, but it doesn't always tell us what. Another assessment is the listening comprehension assessment. Here you read the passage aloud, so the adult reads the passage and the students answer the questions. This removes the decoding from the equation and isolates the student's language comprehension. So we think back to the reading rope. We are assessing the language comprehension component of the reading rope. So how do we interpret these results when we see them? If listening comprehension, meaning the teacher is reading the story and they're able to comprehend the story and answer questions, if that is strong, but reading comprehension is weak, meaning when they read it on their own, the student understands language, vocabulary, and ideas. They have a strong part of the language comprehension rope already, but they're having trouble accessing the meaning through the print, which means they're having a hard time decoding the words. And ultimately, they need to be able to do that on their own. This tells us that the issue is not just comprehension, it's something below comprehension. It's usually fluency or decoding. So, for example, a student can retell a story beautifully when you read it aloud to them, but when they read it to themselves, they may miss details or skip words or give vague answers. This is not a comprehension problem or always a comprehension problem. It's a decoding or fluency problem as well. If you stop at the comprehension assessment, you may not uncover other areas of need. Another example is a student struggles to explain the meaning of a passage even when it is read aloud. They may not understand key vocabulary or may lack background knowledge, or may have difficulty processing complex sentences. In this case, the breakdown really is at comprehension level too, and instruction should focus on building language and possibly not phonics, but also possibly phonics, which is why we need to dig deeper. So why does this step matter in my breakdown guide? Without this distinction, it's easy to misdiagnose the problem. A student who can't comprehend may actually be a student who simply can't decode the words fast enough to understand them. This step ensures we don't waste time teaching comprehension strategies or just comprehension strategies to a student who actually needs decoding or fluency support. Let's look at the next part of my breakdown guide, fluency. If comprehension is weak, the next place we step down is to fluency, which includes accuracy and automaticity. So, are they accurate with reading the words? Can they read them correctly? Are they automatic? Do they do it quickly? And do they have expression when they're reading it? Do they use proper phrasing? Do they use punctuation marks correctly? Fluency is the bridge between decoding and comprehension. When students cannot recognize enough words automatically, so we go back to the brain research, they don't have enough words in their visual word form memory, reading becomes slow, choppy, and it's hard. And when all of their cognitive energy is spent on figuring out the words, there's very little left for understanding the text. This is why fluency is such an important check mark or checkpoint in the step back guide. So how do we assess fluency? To assess fluency, we use several tools. One being the oral reading fluency, and this is usually a time test. This is where the student reads a grade level passage for 1 minute, and the teacher is tracking how many words correct they have per minute, how many errors they have, how many self-corrections they have, how many hesitations they have. These scores come from usually assessments that your district provides. They're usually short to brief grade level oral reading fluency passages. You can also get them from programs like Ames Web or Dibbles, and Dibbles is often free on the internet. Or state benchmark assessments may have oral reading fluency passages that you use, or if the program you're using might give you fluency checks. These tools give us standardized norm reference data that helps us compare a student's fluency to grade level expectations. For example, a student reads 95 words per minute but misreads 20 of them. This is not a fluent reader. That student is not fluently reading. Another type of assessment is a fluency rating scale. And these you can just Google online, and there are often many of them you can find. It looks like a rubric. And these scales help us evaluate how kids are doing with phrasing, how they're doing with expression, smoothness, pace, attention to punctuation. A student may read accurately, but in a monotone, word by word manner. This tells us they are still devoting too much cognitive energy to decoding. So, what does weak fluency look like? A student may read word by word with long pauses between each word. A student may read accurately but extremely slow, making comprehension difficult. The student may read quickly but inaccurately and skipping or substituting words. A student can read without expression, ignoring punctuation and not phrasing. A student can lose their place or become visibly fatigued during reading. All of these are signs that a student is not yet reading with automaticity. So, what does the fluency data tell us? If fluency is weak, we do not treat it as a fluency problem alone. Fluency problems almost always point to weak decoding or insufficient automatic word recognition. So, for example, a student who reads 40 words correct per minute in second grade is not struggling because they need more practice reading fast. They are struggling because they cannot decode enough words automatically. This is why the step back guide moves us downward again from fluency to decoding. Now we've reached decoding, one of the most common sources of reading difficulty. Decoding is the ability to apply phonics knowledge to read unfamiliar words. It requires students to recall letter sound correspondence, blending sounds smoothly, and recognize phonics patterns. When decoding is weak, everything above it, word recognition, fluency, comprehension, begins to fall apart. So, what does weak decoding look like? Weak decoding often shows up as students guessing based on the first letter or picture. They might read the word cap for cup or shop for ship, sounding out each letter, but maybe they're not blending it together. Their reading can also be difficult, and they read the same word differently every time. They may know sounds in isolation, but not able to apply them in words. So these patterns show students do not yet have secure phonics knowledge or cannot apply it automatically. So how do we assess decoding? We use several tools to understand where decoding breaks down. A decoding screener is often a free tool you can find online. I like the Core Phonics Survey. And what this assesses is it starts with letter sound knowledge. Then it assesses CVC words, digraphs, blends, CVCE, vowel teams, and so on. Just like at the beginning of this module, I shared with you what a typical kindergartner, first grader, and second grader is taught in phonics. It assesses those skills and how they decode those types of words. These screeners show which patterns are mastered, which ones are emerging, or which ones are missing. You can also give a spelling screener. So spelling is decoding in reverse. So if a student spells ship as sip, they likely don't understand SH. If they spell cake as cack, they may not understand the CVCE pattern. Spelling reveals gaps that oral reading may hide. Another assessment is the blending assessment. And I have this assessment on my Teachers Pay Teacher store. The blending assessment is especially powerful because it measures what students can blend independently, not just what a teacher feeds them when you feed them sounds. So on this assessment, students move through 2 phoneme words, 3 phoneme words, and 4 phoneme words. So you begin with words that have continuous sounds at the beginning and increase in complexity. This assessment shows whether students can blend continuous sounds or stop sounds. It also tells you the highest number of phonemes that a student can blend. You can pick up on what strategies they naturally use, and you can also see where your instruction should begin. So if a student cannot blend two phoneme words, then we're going to need to start there when it comes to learning how to blend. So in this document, you get a documentation sheet that helps you keep track of all of the things, and you also get an if-then guidance. So for example, if a student is struggling with early blending, then you begin with foundational phonemic awareness routines. And I give you lots of examples of things to do with that. Another assessment is the letter sound knowledge check. Now, this was part of your decoding screener, but I have a separate one that just does uppercase, lowercase, and letter sounds. So this test can be given if you are assuming that the student does not know enough letter sounds automatically. And if that is the case, then decoding is going to be extremely difficult. So the letter knowledge survey identifies which letters the students can name, upper and lowercase, which sounds they know. You can also assess on how quickly they can retrieve the sounds. And if a student knows fewer than 20 sounds, then phonics instruction must pause until the foundation is secure. And in a later module, we will talk about using letter learning lesson plans versus phonics lesson plans. So all of these tools together, all of them listed on the screen above, create a complete picture of decoding readiness. Together they tell you whether a student has the letter sound foundation needed, whether they can blend sounds orally, which is needed to decode. They also tell you what phonics patterns they can decode and which phonics patterns they cannot decode. And it also helps you understand where instruction must begin in phonics. And it removes the guesswork and gives you a clear, confident instructional starting point. So a couple examples of where a student may start. If a student confuses the short E and I sound, then you might be doing things like pen and pin and different CVC words with those 2 different sounds in them. If they cannot decode digraphs, then you would start teaching them explicitly at CH, TH, C, or SH. If they struggle with CVCE, the magic E pattern, then that is where you're going to begin instruction. You are going to begin wherever the lowest need is on these screeners. So decoding instruction must always match the student's actual skill level. So all the assessments I have available from my Teacher Pay Teacher store are linked in the comments below. The final part of the Step Back Guide is phonemic awareness. This is the most foundational skill in early reading. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the individual sounds or phonemes in spoken words. It is completely auditory screener or test. Students do not look at letters during this assessment. They listen and respond to you. If a child cannot hear the sounds in a word, they will struggle to map those sounds, orthographically map those sounds to letters, which means decoding becomes extremely difficult. This is why phonemic awareness is the final and most important checkpoint in the Step Back Guide. What does weak phonemic awareness look like?
This often looks like students will blend sounds incorrectly. So for the word sat, they may say it, or they might struggle to segment sounds. So you give them the word sat and you ask them to say each individual sound, and they have trouble saying that. Or they confuse similar phonemes in sounds. Some are voiced, some are unvoiced. Some have very similar sounds, like in the short vowels. They may add or delete sounds when they're repeating words back to you. They may also struggle to isolate beginning sounds, middle sounds, or ending sounds in words. They may say sounds correctly, but cannot put them together. These students often, when they're reading, they rely heavily on pictures or guessing when reading. And these behaviors tell us that a student is not yet ready for all the phonics instruction yet, and they really need support in learning how to blend and segment words, which is the building blocks of reading and spelling. So how do we assess phonemic awareness? We use a phonemic awareness screener, and we really focus on seeing what they can do with blending and segmenting, because those are the building blocks of reading and spelling. There are many online that are free. Mine specifically focuses on the blending and segmenting, which is the components you need to be able to do to read and spell. So on my test, you're going to, with students, blend phonemes, segment phonemes. You're going to identify beginning, middle, and end sounds. And you're also going to blend and segment at the syllable level and at the onset and rhyme level as well. But other screeners online might have you do things that are a little bit further and more complex, which is when you have to manipulate sounds, when you might need to add or delete sounds or substitute sounds orally. So this test gives a complete picture of a student's sound level readiness for decoding. So where are they ready when it comes to learning how to decode? So why does this matter? Phonemic awareness is the foundation of decoding. If a student cannot blend k, at into cat, they cannot decode cat in print. If they cannot segment ship into sh, I, p, they cannot spell it. Phonemic awareness is the glue that connects spoken language to written language. So what does the data tell you about phonemic awareness? It tells you whether a student is ready for phonics, whether they need oral practice with blending before learning how to decode. It tells you whether they need segmenting practice before spelling. Also, do they need to work with continuous sounds or stop sounds or both? Whether they can handle 2, 3, or 4 phoneme words, and whether they need instruction in manipulating sounds. This is the layer where we identify the most foundational gaps. Instructional examples based on phonemic awareness data. These are some examples of what it would look like. If a student cannot blend 2 phoneme words, then begin with continuous sounds. So if they can't blend at, for example, you might continue with, or you might begin with continuous sounds like M or S. If a student can blend 2 phoneme words but not 3 phoneme words, then you might introduce simple CVC words at the beginning with high utility sounds. So if a student can blend but not segment, then you can use tapping or counters or fingers to support sound separation. Those are just a few examples. So how does phonemic awareness connect to decoding So phonemic awareness is not the end goal. It's the launch pad for decoding. So students must be able to hear sounds, blend sounds, segment sounds. And before they can do that, they need to be able to blend letters, decode words, spell words.
So if phonemic awareness is weak, phonics instruction will not stick. So this assessment that I have available through TPT is linked in the comments below. This is the point in the assessment process where everything comes together. We've collected data across multiple layers: comprehension, fluency, decoding, and phonemic awareness, and now we use that information to make smart, targeted instructional decisions. So here's the process step by step. So first, you're going to identify the breakdown point. The first step is to determine the lowest skill that is not yet secure. That is where instruction must begin, even if the student is in a higher grade. So for example, a second grader struggling with multisyllabic words might actually have a decoding gap in short vowels or digraphs. Or a first grader who can read CVC words but not blend may need more work with oral blending before moving forward. So finding the breakdown point prevents us from teaching skills to a student is not ready for. Second, we must match instruction to the student's needs. So in all the assessments you gave, you're going to figure out and use that data to decide what the students can and cannot yet do. So for example, if a student can decode CVC words but not yet CVCE words, instruction should begin with long vowel patterns starting with the magic E. If the letter knowledge survey shows the students know only 10 letter sounds, phonics instruction must pause until letter sound knowledge is secure. These tools ensure instruction is targeted and not guesswork. The third step is to monitor progress over time. Monitoring progress is essential for knowing whether instruction is working, but we will cover this more in depth in an upcoming module. For now, remember, progress monitoring helps you see patterns, adjust pacing, and determine whether a student is ready to move on. The fourth step is adjusting adjusting instruction based on data. If a student isn't progressing, we adjust the instruction, not the student. This might mean more modeling, watch me blend these sounds slowly, then we'll do it together. Or more repetition, reviewing a phonics pattern for several weeks instead of one. So think back to, we must incorporate cumulative review, and it's not a one and done process. We might take smaller steps, so teach SH and CH separately before introducing TH. We might change the routines that we're going to discuss more in depth in the next module. And a student might need more kinesthetic support. We might increase practice opportunities, give them more time during the day to practice. Adjustments are not a sign of a failure. They are a sign of responsive teaching. And the final step that we need to do is group students by skill need. If you're providing small group instruction in your classroom, this is where you group students by skill need, not reading level. So you might have a group working on phonemic awareness, blending and segmenting. You might have a group working on CVC decoding, or you might have a group working on vowel teams. Grouping by skill ensures that every student receives instruction at the level where they can actually grow, not at a level determined by a leveled reader or a benchmark score. This makes intervention efficient, targeted, and effective. As we wrap up Module 2, remember that the purpose of assessment is clarity. When we step back through comprehension, fluency, decoding, and phonemic awareness, we uncover the true starting point for instruction. This process removes the guesswork and allows us to teach with precision, confidence, and purpose. The assessments you explored in this module work together to give you a complete picture of each student's reading profile. When we know exactly where a student's skill breaks down, we can provide instruction that truly meets their needs. In the next module, we'll shift from identifying the breakdown point to addressing it. Module 3 will focus on the phonics and phonemic awareness routines that support students at every level of need. From early blending to advanced decoding, you'll learn practical routines, daily warm-ups, and instructional moves that align directly with the assessment data you gathered here. By pairing the step back guide with targeted routines, you'll be able to create instruction that is responsive, efficient, and deeply supportive of students' growth.